Hey gang, so I'm going to walk you through really quick what this exercise is supposed to look like today. So on our daily discussion, the first thing you're going to want to do, on our daily agenda, the first thing you're going to want to do is scroll down to today's date, which should be 10/01/2020 if you're in the A group, and it will be, a few days later if you're in the B group. Either way, the first thing we'll say, spend 10 minutes on membrane. Once you've done that, it'll say, watch this video. Hello, here's the video on getting started. So we're going to use this website called Parlia, and there's a link to it right here in this bullet point. So go ahead and click that link, and it should take you over here to Parlia. Parlia catalogs opinions and arguments on big sort of issues so that people can look at all sides of an argument and then make their own decision. By now, you should have already watched Miss Kula's lecture on imperialism. And she should have said something about how American exceptionalism is this idea that America has really unique sort of ideals and philosophies that are really special, and that they sort of ought to be shared with the world, and that partly informs American imperialism. So we're going to dig into that term, American exceptionalism, in this activity so that when you walk away, you have a better understanding of what American exceptionalism is and how you feel about it. So let's just look at an overview here. So this says, is the United States exceptional? American exceptionalism is the belief that America is the greatest and freest nation on earth, destined to guide mankind to true freedom. The supporters of this idea adduce America's unique history and establishment, as well as its values, ideals, and strength. So that idea that we are the greatest, freest nation on earth, and that we ought to guide other nations and the rest of the world to that sort of pinnacle. There's a few sides to this argument, and Parlia puts all three down here. The first you'll see is sort of the counter argument. No, America is not exceptional. The second is a more traditional one. Yes, America is exceptional. And the third one is sort of a middle ground. It says, yes, America is exceptional, but not necessarily in a good way. So this is going to be the bulk of what you do today. You're going to work through the arguments on this website and use them to fill out a Google form and eventually come up with your own sort of stance on American exceptionalism. So here's how the website is laid out. First, we're just going to start at the beginning, right? So I want you to go to this first part of the no, America is not exceptional argument. And you can see that there's like points that back that up underneath it. So we're going to click on this first one. The first argument that America is not exceptional is that it exists in a global context. And we're going to click go to argument. And what that will do is it will give us the overview up here at the top. American history exists in a global context. The United States is not immune to larger tides and trends in global history. Events in American history fit into a much wider global context. So here's how we're going to get to the next argument down here. But first, we want to read down and actually explore this idea. You can skip this voting part. We're going to do that later in our Google form. So we're going to read this argument. American history is not at all distinct from the history of nation building across the world. From its inception, the United States has been the product of global forces and trends. The American Revolution was based on Enlightenment ideas brought from Europe. Thomas Bender, in A Nation Among Nations, argues that as one explores the history of the United States in the 19th century, there is little that is distinct. For example, while the Civil War was an incredibly violent instance of emancipation, between the 1810s and 1880s, states throughout Europe and the New World abolished slavery. Similarly, American imperialists in the Philippines and Puerto Rico at the end of the century closely modeled themselves on European empires. Okay, so I'm going to pause here to show you what you ought to be doing as you're working through this. I also have this Google form over here in my other tab, and you'll see in our daily agenda, the number 3 is to fill out the Google form. It's going to be best if you do these at the same time. So as I'm going through the article, I'm going to flip over here to my Google form. I'm going to put in my name, first name, Mr., last name, or block 1A. And number 1 says, in 1 to 2 sentences, what is one main argument that America is not exceptional? So I'm going to go back here. And so far, they've made the point that the American Revolution was based on Enlightenment thinking from Europe, and that while we had a civil war when we abolished slavery, so did lots of other nations in Europe, and that even American imperialists based their models on European empire. So I'm going to write the American Revolution government were based on European Enlightenment ideas. then important American events like the Civil War were not so different than abolishing slavery in European countries. Okay, that is one main argument that America is not exceptional. I'm going to keep going. Americans were also deeply involved in global political movements, and the struggles for causes like increased workers' rights, women's suffrage, and temperance exist in global contexts. Advocates for these causes worked across borders, borrowing tactics, meeting, and drawing on the same literature to change national politics. American history cannot be viewed in isolation from a larger global movement and trends. Then down here at the bottom, I really like this part, so make sure you take a look at this. They offer you this little recap of the argument. Part one of the premise, American history has been shaped by global political trends, and part two, while American history is in some ways distinct, like all national histories are, it cannot be separated from its global context. So I'd add to my first one here, even movements like women's rights and what other examples did it give? Workers' rights happened all over the world, not just in America. Okay, so I'm done with number one. I've understood the first part of that argument. My next move is going to be to flip over here to the next argument and work through the second part of the stance that American exceptionalism is a national myth. I'll repeat that same process with number two, which asks me to give a second argument that America is not exceptional, and then I will move on to the next argument. This is the stance that America is exceptional. And I'll do the same thing with the reasons that people argue America is exceptional. And I'll fill those out for numbers 3 and 4. I'll move on to the next position after I do those ones and look at this one, which I think personally is the most interesting. America is exceptional, but not necessarily in a good way. And I'll answer questions 5 and 6 for why America might be exceptional and not a good way. Okay, cool. So when you're all done, you'll see number 7 here asks you to come up with your own opinion, and number 8 asks you to defend the opinion, explaining your reasoning with details from the website. That part's important. It gives lots of sources and specific information. Pull some of the most compelling ones out. Go ahead and submit your form, and that is your day. Have a good one.